For most people, Chernobyl is already a forbidden place, an abandoned city, a fenced-off zone, a scar on the map where time stopped in 1986. But that idea is only partially true, because even inside the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, there are places humans are still forbidden to enter, not discouraged, not restricted, completely off limits. Areas where a few minutes can mean irreversible damage. Zones where radiation didn't fade the way scientists expected, and in some cases never did. These places don't announce themselves. There are no flashing lights, no alarms, no visible warning once you're close enough. Just quiet forests, empty buildings, wetlands, basements, and soil that looks unchanged. But beneath the surface are invisible conditions that make human presence dangerous, even decades later. Radiation doesn't decay evenly. It never did. After the explosion of Reactor 4, officials assumed contamination would disperse gradually across the landscape. Levels would drop year by year. Dangerous areas would shrink into manageable pockets. That assumption guided early cleanup efforts and long-term planning. Instead, the opposite happened. Radiation settled unevenly, shaped by wind patterns, rainfall, soil composition, and vegetation. What formed were invisible pockets of extreme exposure scattered unpredictably across the zone. Scientists now refer to these areas as persistent radiation hotspots, and many of them were never supposed to exist this long. Some hotspots remain so radioactive that even brief exposure can exceed annual safety limits for nuclear workers. Others fluctuate wildly, safe 1 month, dangerous the next. A shift in soil, a storm, animal movement, or erosion can pull buried radioactive material back toward the surface. Researchers don't linger in these areas. They move quickly, if they enter at all. Dosimeters are checked constantly. Routes are planned in advance. Some zones are crossed only once, just long enough to measure, mark, and retreat. Other areas are never entered at all. One of the most infamous forbidden spaces lies directly beneath Reactor 4. After the explosion, molten nuclear fuel burned through concrete and steel, flowing downward into lower levels of the reactor building. What it formed was a hardened mass of radioactive material unlike anything scientists had ever encountered. It wasn't just fuel. It was fuel mixed with sand, concrete, metal, and structural debris, fused together by extreme heat. This mass became known as the elephant's foot. When it was first discovered, radiation levels were so intense that early investigators could only approach for seconds. Cameras fogged, equipment failed. Some workers received lethal doses simply by standing nearby. Even today, despite radiation levels dropping since the 1980s, the area remains one of the most dangerous locations on site. Access is rare. Time is tightly controlled. Protective equipment is mandatory. Even then, the space is unstable. The structure continues to age. Moisture seeps in. Cracks widen. Scientists worry not just about radiation, but about collapse. A structural failure could release trapped contamination back into the environment. This space is not sealed because of history. It's sealed because of risk that still exists. Far from the reactor itself, another category of forbidden zones exists, quieter and more deceptive. Large sections of forest, marshland, and wetlands remain off limits, not because radiation is obvious, but because it's mobile. Cesium-137 and strontium-90 bind to organic matter. In wetlands, where water levels change seasonally, contamination moves vertically and horizontally through the soil. In dry periods, radioactive particles rise closer to the surface. During floods, they spread outward. In winter, freezing and thawing reshuffle contamination again. These environments behave less like stable ground and more like slow-moving radioactive systems. No long-term human presence can be managed there. Digging is forbidden. Construction is forbidden. Even walking off established paths can disturb soil enough to raise exposure levels sharply. The safest option is to leave these places untouched and monitored from a distance. Then, there are the abandoned villages. Dozens of settlements were evacuated in the days and weeks after the explosion. Some are now part of guided routes. Others remain strictly forbidden. The reason isn't structural decay alone. It's contamination trapped inside the buildings themselves. Wooden houses absorbed radioactive dust differently than concrete structures. Floorboards, insulation, and ash residues captured particles that still emit radiation today. In some homes, levels remain high enough that prolonged entry would be dangerous without protective gear. From the outside, these villages look peaceful. Trees grow through fences, windows are intact, silence hangs heavy. But inside, radiation lingers in corners, walls, and dust layers that haven't been disturbed for decades. They are time capsules of danger. Perhaps the least understood forbidden areas are the ones buried underground. In the chaotic aftermath of the explosion, cleanup crews buried contaminated vehicles, tools, clothing, and debris in hastily dug trenches. Records were incomplete. Some locations were poorly mapped. Others were never recorded at all. Over time, vegetation grew over these burial sites. Soil settled. Forests reclaimed the land. And then, years later, radiation spikes appeared where none were expected. These sites are still being discovered. When they are, access is immediately restricted. Digging stops. Monitoring begins. Some areas are permanently closed, not because scientists fully understand the risk, but because they don't. Unknown contamination is often more dangerous than known contamination. Even modern technology struggles in these environments. Robots sent into high radiation zones frequently fail. Electronics degrade, sensors malfunction, batteries drain faster than expected, signals drop without warning. The same problem that forced humans onto the reactor roof in 1986 still exists today. There are places where machines cannot remain long enough to gather meaningful data. That reality places a hard limit on exploration. What makes these forbidden zones especially unsettling is how ordinary they appear. There are no fences separating danger from safety. Often, the only thing preventing disaster is a reading on a handheld dosimeter. Step a few meters in the wrong direction, and exposure jumps instantly. That unpredictability is why scientists treat the exclusion zone with extreme caution. Not panic, not fear, respect. Because radiation doesn't announce itself, it doesn't warn, it doesn't care how careful you are. It simply exists. Decades after Chernobyl, these forbidden areas remain active reminders that some damage cannot be undone. It can only be managed, monitored, and avoided. Not every environment heals. Not every scar fades. Some remain open, reshaping the land quietly and indefinitely. From above, the exclusion zone looks calm. Forests sway. Animals move freely. The world appears to have moved on. But beneath that calm are places humans still do not belong, and may not for a very long time.